Hello everyone, my name is Michael McCann from the Wayward Art Company, and welcome to part 3 of this tutorial for creating a character in Blender 2.77. We had left off in part 2 by finishing most of the modeling, but we still have the inside of the mouth to do, so we can do that now. We'll just create the gums and also the teeth. So I'm going to use Alt and right click with the mouse to select loops at the top of the mouth and the bottom, and this will give us the general shape for the gums. Okay, so I think that looks good, but it probably doesn't need to go back that far, so I can use B to box select and the middle mouse button to deselect some of these back vertices, and then just use this front part. So with those selected, I can type Shift D and duplicate them, and then Y to bring them out on the Y axis, and I can use these to now start creating the gums. Okay, so now that we have the general shape of our gums, I can press A to deselect everything, and then hover over the top edge and press L to select it, and then E to extrude on the Z axis, and then do the same thing for the bottom. Select it with L, and then extrude down on Z. And I do want to make these a little longer, so I'll select these back edges and extrude them on Y. Okay, so that looks pretty good. However, the normals are a little strange for sure. So I can press N to bring up my options and then display the normals on the faces. So you can see that some of them are pointing out and some of them are pointing inward. So I can select everything and then go to Shading UVs and Recalculate. And that fixed the bottom, but the top is actually wrong, so I can select that and then just flip the direction. And now all of the normals are facing the right way. Okay, so I can select the gums now and press E to extrude, and then cancel it with the left mouse button, and then Alt S to scale along the normals, which gives the gums a little thickness. Alright, so now we can select the gums and pull them back on Y so that we can start to fit them inside of the mouth, because even though we created these from loops inside of the mouth, we added thickness, so we will need to edit them so that they do fit a little better. So right now on the bottom you can see that they're a little too wide, so we can select this loop of faces and pull it in. And basically what I'm going for is I'm trying to find like a good space between the mouth and the tongue. I don't want to crowd the tongue, but I also don't want the gums to exceed past the inside of the mouth. And aside from correcting the shape of the gum, I can physically make more room by pulling out the corners of the mouth. So I'll select these two edges and just pull this out on X, which will give me more room to correct the shape of the gums. Okay, so I'm happy with that. Now that the bottom gums are done, I'm going to do the same thing for the top, just edit them so that they fit along the inside of the mouth. Now I want to deselect the gums and select the rest of the mesh and press H to hide. And that way we won't have anything obstructing our view while we work on the teeth. But really quickly I want to select these back faces and the ones on the top and the bottom, basically anything that won't be seen, and press X and then delete those faces. Okay, so now I can start adding the teeth. The canines would be about here, but maybe I'll actually start in the center. So I'll select the center edge and press Shift S and cursor to selected. And then I want to undo the clipping in the mirror modifier. Then type Shift A and add a cube. And because it already has the subsurf modifier, it's going to appear more like a sphere. So I'll position this so that it fits into the gums. And it also has the mirror modifier on it, so I'll pull it out on the x-axis. And now we have the two front teeth. And I can select these top faces and move them down, and then press X and delete faces, because you won't see those, obviously. Okay, so these teeth I think technically are known as the incisors. So we can make about 4 of these. So we can just duplicate it with Shift D and move it out on X, and then drag it back a little on Y so that it fits with the curve of the gums. Okay, and then duplicate this one more time on X and drag this back, and this will be the canine, or the top canines. Okay, so I can grab this bottom face and move it down on Z, and then scale it in to a point. Okay, now I'll use the edge select and select the top edge and scale that out so that it's a bit bigger at the base. Okay, and then I can select the face and maybe it would be up to you if you wanted to add another loop in there to give it more of a curve. I don't really think it's necessary though. I do want to scale these incisors a little on Y so that they're a little more flat and not so spherical shaped. Can rotate them a little so that the rotation actually fits along with the curve of the gum as well. Okay, those canines look a little too straight, so I'm going to select the bottom face and just pull it back so that it looks like it's curving back toward the inside of the mouth. That looks pretty good. So now I can select the canine and press Shift D to duplicate it. I'm just going to move it back, and I'm going to create a few molars. And on molars on carnivores and omnivores, they're basically just sort of broad, flat canines. They're sort of pointy, but they're sort of like long and thin. So I'm basically just going to scale it on Y to give it that kind of long, thin appearance, and then just scale and rotate it so that it fits into the gum a little better. Okay, so duplicate this again with Shift D and scale it maybe a little more, just so that it's a slightly different shape than the one before it, and just rotate it so that it fits into the gums. Now that the top teeth are done, I can just select them and type Shift D to duplicate them, and then rotate them on X 180 degrees. And now pull them back so that they fit into the bottom gums. I'm also going to scale them down so that they're a bit smaller than the top teeth. Okay, so now I can do the same with the canine. Type Shift D to duplicate it, and then rotate on X 180 degrees. And then scale these down a little as well. And I'll pull that top face back so that they too are sort of facing the inside of the mouth. Alright, so now I can do the bottom molars. So I'll just duplicate this with Shift D and scale it on Y. And I want these to fit between the that gap in the top molars. So I can just rotate this so that it's lined up with the gums. And then I'll do one more on the bottom. And I think that should be good for the teeth. And while I don't know the exact number of teeth that a ringtail has, this is more of a cartoony style character, so it doesn't really need to be completely accurate. Okay, so that looks good, and now I can unhide the rest of the body with Alt-H. And now the modeling is completely finished, and we can start the texturing process, which begins with UV unwrapping. Okay, so now I can hide this background image so that it isn't distracting. And with the seams, I'm going to start first with the head. So I'll just select these few on the forehead, and this center line all the way around to the back of the head. And ending right where the neck is, I'm going to select this loop and hit Control E and then choose Mark Seam. And now I'll select these edges at the base of the ear, and because we're using the mirror modifier, it will select these edges and add the seams on both sides. And I also want to select this loop around the ear and create a seam there as well to separate the front from the back. And I think I'll separate the nose as well. This probably would unwrap fine along with the rest of the head, but because I want to add some more detail to the nose, so I'll separate it so that I can scale those UVs up a little. Okay, now I'll go ahead and separate the hand from the arm. So just select these loops and Control E, Mark Seam. Do the same thing with the feet. And ordinarily you would have to keep this in mind that sometimes seams are visible. So you would look for areas like this seam underneath of the legs. This would be less visible. So it's a good spot to add a seam. In this instance, it doesn't really matter because I'll be creating a particle system of hair, so you won't see the texture at all. But in other instances, you would definitely want to be a little more cautious about where you add your seams. In this case, I'm running a seam all the way up the side of the character, which would likely be noticeable if the character didn't have hair. So I'll just continue all the way up the side until it meets that loop around the wrist. And then Control E, Mark Seam. And then up the other side of the arm until it meets that loop around the neck. where we added our seam. And Control E, mark seam. And that's most of the easy stuff done. What's left now is just the more challenging areas like the feet and the hands. So basically with both, I'm just going to go around the base of the foot. And with the hands, just, the same way, I'm going to just separate the palm from the top of the hand. And I think that should unwrap pretty well. Okay, and it's kind of hard to see where all of the edges that I'm selecting are. So I'm just going to type E to go into wireframe, and now I'll be able to see if everything's connected, which it isn't. I left the heel off, so I'll just select these edges, and then Control E, mark seam, and that should be it for the bottom of the foot. Now I'm just going to hold Alt and select these loops around the claws and mark those seams as well. Okay, and now again I'll just do the same with the hand, separating the palm from the top. And the only difference is on the thumb, it will actually go down the middle of the thumb rather than separating it from the top and the bottom. But it will still unwrap pretty neatly, I think. So I'll just hold Alt and go around the nail as well to separate the claw. The claws, I'm not exactly sure how they're going to unwrap. They could be a little stretched, but if they are, that will be really easy to clean it up, I think. Okay, so have those edges around the hand. And these last few between the fingers. And we'll do a test unwrap before we actually apply the mirror modifier to make sure that there's nothing weird looking in the UVs or nothing that's too stretched out. Okay, so that should be everything except for the inside of the mouth, which can be a little complicated. So let's just go on the inside of the head. And the most obvious thing is separating the tongue. So I'll just select this loop and hit Control E and mark seam. So now just going to scale this in a little because I'm noticing that the gums are showing through a little. Okay, that's better. And maybe I'll just round out the tip of the tongue a little because it's got sort of a funny shape to it. Okay. So besides the seam at the back of the tongue, I think I also want to separate the top from the bottom, and that will make it unwrap really easily. So we'll add the seam there, and maybe do the same thing for the whole mouth in general, just run a seam along the side. And then select these loops on the inside of the mouth. It's a little tricky to decide which ones. No, there should be two edges that connect in the mouth, which would be a little better to a better place to mark those seams. So I'm going to select the tongue and press H to hide. And I'll do the same thing with the gums, just hide them with H. And now I can see where these seams are. Okay, so I know I want one there on the inside of the mouth to separate the top from the bottom. And then right here at the corner of the mouth, I can add these two seams right where the opening of the mouth is. I think a seam there will let that unwrap really cleanly. Alright, so I think I'm going to do a test unwrap now, just to make sure that there's no weird stretching or that I missed any seams. So I'll come up here and switch to my UV editing window. And in edit mode, I'll just select everything and then type U and choose unwrap. And immediately I see that I didn't put a seam for the tail. So I can just do that really easily. I'll select this loop where the tail meets the body, Control E, mark seam, and then I'll just do one right up the back, just to split the tail into two different parts. Okay, so I'll mark that seam. And now I'll unwrap again, and I think everything looks okay. There are a few weird spots, but I think for the most part, when I apply the mirror modifier, everything will look good. Right here, I think these are probably teeth or the claws on the hand or the feet, so they're a little weird, but we can correct those with maybe a smart UV unwrap or something. But the main part of the body looks pretty good. Okay, so now I'll go back to my default view, and I'll just, I want to duplicate this model now, so I'll just select the body and the eyes, and I'll type Shift D and duplicate it, and then with the M key I can move this to a separate layer. And that way it doesn't really matter what mistakes I make from this point on, because I know I can always come back to a point that I was happy with before I applied the modifiers and so on. So, but now I can come back to that first layer and go to my modifiers and apply the mirror modifier. Now I can go back to the UV editing window and tab into edit mode, and then press U and unwrap again. And that unwrapped pretty well. For the most part, everything looks really nice. Again, there are going to be some of those issues, I think, with the claws. I can't really tell if it's the claws or the teeth, so we'll probably separate those after we make some adjustments to the UVs. Like here, there's some stretching and probably in a few other spaces as well. But I did want to scale the nose up and the tongue as well, because on some parts of the mesh I will be giving a little bit of a bump map. So I'll just bring the nose down and scale it up. And aside from the bump map, I just want to put some detail into the actual texture painting of the nose. So more pixel space will help it look a little more, I guess, just a little more nice. So the tongue as well, the inside of the ears will get a little bit of texture painting. I'm going to move all of these little pieces out to the side. So if I just select different points and hit Control L, it selects all of those little islands. So I can scale those up. I'm not going to use a texture on the teeth. You could if you wanted to, but I think just a white material, like a white glossy material, will work really well. So here I'm just hovering over each of the teeth and selecting them with L. And this way we'll be able to unwrap these separately so that they're, separated from the claws. Because of course we'll be painting them different colors, and right now we can't tell them apart, so it'll be better just to group them all together. So I'll just type U and unwrap these again, and now everything's neat in like a little square. So now I'll just deselect these little UVs with a B and the middle mouse button to deselect. And now I can just move all of the UVs of the teeth into the texture space. Okay, so now this area over on the side looks a little cluttered, and there's quite a bit of room in the middle of the texture space, so I can maybe sort it out a bit. And I do want to maybe increase the texture space for some of the areas. Again, like the inside of the ear. Basically any area that doesn't have hair, you'll see the mesh itself. So we'll probably put a little more detail in those areas when we texture paint. So obviously it needs more texture space. Although we'll probably create a pretty big texture too. I don't really know what size I'll do yet. Maybe 2048 by 2048, or maybe twice that size. But we'll see. But yeah, definitely the bottom of the feet and the bottom of the hands, because they, again, the pads won't have any hair on them, so that texture space that texture or part of the mesh will probably get some more detail. The tongue, the inside of the ears, those areas. Alright, definitely some of these islands look a little too close to one another, which makes texture painting a little more complicated than it has to be. We'll be painting right on the mesh for most of it, but we'll also need to paint directly onto our texture. So when things are a little too close together, it can be kind of challenging. And I think I'm going to go ahead now and re-unwrap those claws, because again, that was maybe the worst part of the stretching. So because we added seams around the claws, we can just select these with L. Just hover directly over one of the claws and the L key will select it. Okay, and then the ones on the feet as well. And rather than just use unwrap, I'm going to use Smart UV Project. And I think that will be fine, because I'm just going to paint the claws all one color anyway, so and they're so small, I doubt you would see any seams on them. So I can just maybe move these hands to the side and make some space. I'll just use B to box select half of them, and then Control L to make sure that I have all of those islands selected. And make sure I deselect the hands. Let's do this again. B to box select and then Control L. And now I can just move these down into the space and scale them down. Okay, and then I'll put the second half directly below it. Just scale them in and move them down. Okay, and I think that looks good. I think we have our textures good. I'm just going to pin them with P, the P key, and that way you can't, if you accidentally hit unwrap again, you can't move those UVs. Now I'm going to create a new texture, and I'll just call this, character texture. And for the texture size, I think 1024 is a little small, so I'm going to, I think I want it 4 times the size. So in order to do the multiplication, you can just type an asterisk and then the number 4 and press enter. And that does the multiplication for you. So it's 4096. So it'll be 4096 by 4096. And press enter, and that creates that new texture. So now I'm going to go ahead and save my file, and I think this is probably a good stopping point. And then in the next video we'll just be going to CG textures and gathering some textures, and then we'll actually start our texture painting. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.